Hello YouTube, welcome back to the Count Beans channel. If you haven't already seen the earlier detailed build video for this setup, I'll put a link in the description below in order that you can check it out. So let's get on to some testing. I ran a couple of standard benchmarks. On Cinebench R20 the system scored 3532, and on Geekbench 5 the single core score was 1289 and the multi-core score was 6992. The system's running completely stock. No overclocking of either the graphics card or the processor. The only change I've made is to ensure the memory is up to speed at 3600. All games have been tested at 1080p and 1440p at both ultra and medium settings, and all the footage you're seeing has been taken using OBS and has been recorded at 1080p in ultra settings. So first game here is Fortnite, and our benchmark frame rates are pretty decent I think. On ultra settings we were getting around 120 FPS on 1080p, dropping down to around 85 to 90 on ultra. On medium settings we were up above 150 frames per second on 1080p, and just under 100 at around 94 average on 1440p. The game looks absolutely glorious. I think unless you're a competitive gamer, these sort of speeds are absolutely fine. Certainly for a player as bad as me, it's much more important to enjoy the scenery than worry about trying to win a game. As ever with all benchmark footage, you're going to see the best of my 5 hours of gameplay condensed into just under 10 minutes. Rest assured that most of it was completely embarrassing. Ended up with me being shot up the backside more times than I care to remember by people a quarter of my age. Right, next up we have CSGO. Now I have to admit this game I'd never played till I built this system, so I've been playing it for just under about 4 days. All the footage you're seeing is against bots. I've just been too scared to go online and get my backside handed to me. Moving on to our benchmarks then. CSGO is renowned to be a game that's very easy to run, so unsurprisingly at ultra settings we were getting over 230 frames per second, 1080p, just the wrong side of 220 at around 210 on 1440p. At medium settings both 1080p and 1440p we're averaging over 300 frames per second. So this system absolutely melted through Counter-Strike Global Offensive. As I said, I've never played this game before, so you'll be treated to footage of about the only kills I made in about an hour and a half of gameplay, and against bots as well. I have to admit, I really enjoyed this game. I'm sure I'll play it again online perhaps, but I'm terrified of letting down some teammates. I did find with this game, it really comes down to the weapon you have in your hand. With a pistol I was absolutely dreadful. Give me a massive submachine gun, I'd run through bots like no one's business. It gave me the confidence to think maybe there is a future for me as a competitive player. But perhaps not. Coming up next we have Rocket League. Now I know this is not really a great game to benchmark. It's a really straightforward game to play and it's not going to test any system, certainly not one with the sort of kit my system's got. But I absolutely love the game. I thought I'd just let you suffer a minute or so of gameplay on this, just to see how great it looks, and just to see a few highlights of my competitive play over the last 4 or 5 days. So in terms of benchmarks, somewhat unsurprising, ultra settings, 1080p got up to 250 frames per second, which is the game's max unless you go and tweak it something. At ultra we dipped underneath that at around 210, and on medium settings for 1080p and 1440p we're back over the magic 250. So this system's got this game absolutely covered. In all my time playing this I did manage to score a goal or two, pull off the occasional save, but again, online I imagine most people are just terrified of the thought of getting Count Beans come up on their side. After 4 or 5 days I think I've got the hang of it, and I'll certainly be playing more and more of this game now the system's up and running. But in terms of a test, I think we've had enough Rocket League for now. let's shift on to our next game. So from what I can see on YouTube, a benchmark test isn't a benchmark test unless you're using GTA 5. Now I have to admit, most of my GTA 5 play has been on a PlayStation 4. Until recently that was my game place of choice. Don't hate me, I'm new to PC gaming but not new to gaming, so I had to set up a whole new GTA 5 instance on my Steam account. For the sake of ease, and because GTA 5 has a built-in benchmark test, I conducted a test on all 4 of our settings. On Ultra, at 1080p, we were getting around 85 frames per second, but the game did look fantastic. At 1440p, just over 60, but I think the GTA 5 that's very playable, and 1440p, just really spectacular. Dropping down to medium settings saw quite a big jump, so up to around 120 frames per second at 1080p, and 85 knocking 90 on times in 1440p. On your personal taste whether you're all about quality graphics or frame rate. For me, I don't think GTA 5 is a game I'd be too troubled about. At 1440p, even at ultra settings, I'm quite happy with 65 to 70 frames per second. But then if I come from a console background, I would be, wouldn't I? Finally then for our games testing, we move on to Project Cars 2. Let's have a look at these frame rates because they're really interesting. Well, interesting for a boring old bin counter like me. In ultra settings, 1080p we're getting just over 100 frames per second, and 1440p that dropped down to just over 80. When we came to medium settings, we saw a massive jump up to nigh on 200 frames per second at 1080p, averaging over 150 at 1440p. I was really surprised by that particular variation. It just goes to show just how much more demanding the ultra settings are. Those additional reflections are absolutely beautiful to look at, they do really eat into frame rate. Now again, with a game like Project Cars 2, there is a question as to just how fast you need the frame rate to be when you're racing a car around the track. 70, 80 frames per second is probably absolutely fine, and compares again very favourably to the PlayStation or console versions that I come from. So I think for me, I'd probably stick to ultra settings and just accept the frame rate drop compared to medium. It's not a game I play competitively, it's a game for fun and enjoyment, and looking beautiful for me is far more important than the frame rates we're getting. And it's always tempting to look at the internet and see how you measure up on all sorts of things. And game frame rates and systems is certainly no different to that. One of the things I spotted is there is some significant variation, and here at the end of the video what we've got is an example of running exactly the same car on exactly the same system, exactly the same settings, with just a different viewpoint. The in-car view was running at 6, 7, even 8 frames per second faster on exactly the same point as the car view. Now of course that's not surprising, is it? To be expected, but it just goes to show just how different settings and different times can have an impact on your frame rate. And if you're statistically minded, or research minded, you'll certainly know that with any sort of testing, you certainly find bigger variation within the group. So within your own tests, and you will see variation between the average frame rates that you find across people who are tested. So as I tested, I saw quite significant changes in frame rates at different times at different points of games, unsurprisingly, so an average is only as good as that, but overall I think the system fared really well. Okay YouTube, well thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you've enjoyed the system setup. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything else you'd like to have a look at on this system. But until the next time, go well.